take the initiative. He would never allow it to escalate past a point he felt I may not ready for. Which made him sweet, and caring, and loving. And sometimes those things also made him a dumb shit. There was no way I could force the question verbally out of my mouth, and I knew that the only way I could make the request was through actions. So I released his hair, sliding my hand down his stiff and ridiculously tense shoulders, as he pushed further into my face breathlessly, and palmed my breast and center gloriously roughly. The muscles in his arm were rigid and taut as I lowered my hand to his waist. I grabbed at the waist of his dark jeans, dipping my fingertips inside and pulling it towards me as I panted into his mouth, and pushed myself closer to him in absolute desperation. It seemed to excite him further, as the gritty sound re-emerged from his throat, and he gripped my breast harder. I pressed my thumb into the button of his jeans, grasping it tightly as I used my fingers to unbutton them in one swift motion. I stopped as he yanked his face away from mine, and halted his movements against me, my fingers lingering on the cold metal of his zipper. I opened my eyes and gazed back at him dubiously. The look on his face and in his lust-hooded eyes as we huffed, and we centimeters from each other's face must have mirrored my own. His eyes were impossibly darker, as a few wayward, disheveled bronze locks fell haphazardly onto his forehead. I brought my swollen lip once again in between my teeth, while gazing into his dark eyes, and pulled down the zipper with uncertain movements. His eyelids grew heavier as his jeans became completely opened by my fingers and I felt his hand loosen on my breast. I searched his eyes carefully as our chests heaved, the back of his hand touching his own chest with every puff and pull of charged air between us. The fingertips situated between my legs twitched minutely, but his eyes held no protest, as my fingertips hooked into the waistband of his boxers, lingering precariously between the warmly scarred skin of his stomach and the elastic while I awaited a mimicking action. He must have known my intention all along, because he decreased the pressure of the palm in between my legs and trailed a fingertip to the edge of the fabric, holding over the elastic and the sensitive skin, where my thigh met my center. My breathing became more rapid in unison with his as we stared and panted, and my hand finally dipped down into his undone bands. There was hair and warm and soft, and my hand unsteady with double motive as I plunged into the boxers deliberately. My fingertips finally found him, and skimmed the heated skin of his erection softly. And I resisted the urge to smile at the feel of how aroused he was as his gaze left mine with a sharp inhale. His face contorted slightly, as the hand on my chest fell from my breast to the blanket at his side.
Shit.
He breathed as his gaze shifted around the room behind me. I furrowed my brows, trying to decipher the expression on his face as I used the back of my fingers to lightly caress him, somewhat curious as to the feel of it on my fingers. It was as close as I'd ever come to even seeing one. I felt the blanket below mine being pulled as he gripped it inside his fist. I kept rubbing softly with the skin of my fingers as his dark green eyes danced around the room over my shoulder, refusing to meet my gaze as the muscles in his jaw constricted and tightened. I wasn't sure whether or not I should panic that he wanted to pull away, but it was too late for me to turn back. So I moved my hips against his palm, willing him to uphold his end of the bargain as my hand moved gently beneath the denim of his dark jeans. His gaze finally lurched to mine, and he looked so agonized with his eyebrows scrunched together, forming a deep groove in between his eyes. I was waiting for him to do something as I caressed him gently and stared fixedly into his dark green pools of confliction. Finally he sighed, long and deep, and his face became impossibly more confusing as his fingertip lightly traced the elastic of my panties, and made a delicate shiver resonate through my legs. I could almost see the battle raging in his head, as he struggled with whatever it was that was bothering him.
Edward's point of view. I was so fucking done. I tried. I really tried. I closed my eyes and repeated the periodic table of elements inside of my head. But that just reminded me of science, which reminded me of biology, which reminded me of Bella, which reminded me of my hand in between her legs as she rocked in my lap and whimpered for more. I could feel her growing wet through the lacy material, and it wasn't helping matters any. So I decided to just give in a little bit. It couldn't hurt to just kiss her, and grab her to the little. She'd fucking like it. She'd come quicker. I could go into my bathroom and stroke myself for 5 minutes, while she came down. Then we could go to sleep, and it'd be no big deal. But it got worse. Impossibly so. Instead of just feeling the evidence of her lust in my hand, it was in my face, and on my chest, and inside my mouth, and grasped inside my shaking palm as I fought to hold back, and hang on. It was utterly, and fucking deliciously reprehensible how the whole thing made my dick so hard. I don't know why I let her do it. Maybe I wanted it so badly I had convinced myself that it was for her sake. But I allowed her to undo my jeans, and put her hand inside. Because there was a particular motivation behind her actions. I showed her mine because I wanted to feel hers too. Or maybe that was only one more fucked up justification for it. It didn't really matter, because I let her do it anyways. And when I felt her fingers on me finally, I felt really shitty. Because it felt so goddamn good, and I wanted her to do it harder. I was searching the room, looking for anything to keep my attention away from the way it felt. Because it was wicked and indecently obscene to feel her soft against my hard. But then she moved against me, reminding me of what she wanted, and reminding me of what I wanted. The battle against the teenage hormonal motherfucker raged in my mind as I gazed into her brown eyes, swimming with need and want and love and intent. I could have stopped her, and pulled her hand out of my pants to do it. She could still have what she wanted. I could still feel her without the boundaries of the thin lace. I could do it without her hand on my dick at the same time. Or I could just fucking enjoy the shit out of it. No, Edward Cullen wasn't here anymore. I was officially, full-on, hormonal teenage motherfucker. I hooked my finger into the elastic, and plunged it through to the other side, making her gasp as I slid it downwards, and felt all of her slick arousal against my knuckle. She moaned fucking loudly as her lips parted, and her forehead fell against mine once again. I was still panting, feeling her fingers trace up and down my length as I made another pass with my knuckle. She sighed, and pushed into my finger, making me groan as I just fucking pulled the panties aside, and brought the rest of my fingers to her flesh. The fists in my hair tightened, making my eyes roll back into my head as I used my fingers to run up and down her slick folds slowly. It was hot and wet and soft, and her sweet breaths in my face as I caressed her. And she really was so fucking wet. You're so fucking wet. I groaned involuntarily at the increased feel of her arousal against my fingers. This was always an issue with the hormonal teenage motherfucker. No brain filter whatsoever. I gazed back at her warily from where our foreheads rested against each other. It was dirty, and utterly debauched to say that kind of shit to my girl. So, of course, she hummed and ran the back of her fingers against my erection firmer as we stared into each other's eyes. I clenched my jaw tightly, rubbing her folds as hard as she rubbed me, just like that day in the meadow, because we were both too fucking chicken shit to say what we needed aloud. And when my fingers reached that sensitive bud, I brushed it with my thumb, which made her gasp and buck into my hand. I was rewarded when she ran her thumb over the tip of my erection, making my jaw clench even tighter. I wanted to tell her she was doing it all wrong. Leave her hand to wrap around it tightly in her palm instead of using the back of her fingers. But I couldn't possibly do something so shitty and disrespectful like that. So I kept running my fingers along her as she caressed me, keeping my mouth shut and enjoying the feeling of it as she bathed my face in her warm breaths. Of course, I underestimated my girl. Because she fucking knew how to do it. She was just saving that shit. When my fingers made an elongated pass towards her entrance, her palm shifted inside of my pants. She eyed me pointedly, licking her lips as she grabbed my erection in her hand, and wrapped her little fingers around me tightly. My shoulders fucking quivered. My fingers froze at her entrance as my stomach tensed and I gripped the blanket at my side harder. She was so fucking warm around my dick, making my eyes close as she took one gentle and long stroke up my length. Intention can be a very subjective thing in most cases. But not this one. She wanted my fingers inside of her. and the thought of it combined with the feeling of her palm wrapped around me made me groan as my fingertip made a light circle around the slick location in contemplation. My girl knew just how to make that contemplation easier too. Because the grip of her hand tightened with another pump around me, making me grunt as my face contorted and hardened. She had no fucking idea what she was doing to me, or maybe she did. Either way, it broke me. I opened my eyes as my fingertip barely entered her and I held her gaze, distractedly bracing myself for a cookie, or a scream, or a cry, or something. Her jaw went completely slack as her eyes fluttered closed. I figured it was okay to continue, so I gently slid my finger inside further, penetrating her as much as my paranoia would allow. She was all slick warmth and tight as I stopped, and awaited her reaction to the feeling. She panted, and the fist in my hair actually loosened a bit as she pumped me once more. It was all the approval the teenage hormonal motherfucker needed. I began pulling out and pushing in while she gasped, and pumped my erection in her little palm. It was so fucking warm and wet and flowers and cookies, and more warm as I finally crushed my lips to hers, and swallowed the moan coming from her mouth when my thumb found her clit again. She was everywhere, and I don't know when it happened, but my hands were shaking again as I shoved my tongue into her mouth, trying to be gentle as I pumped my finger in and out of her while she moved in unison with me. The hand that was fisted in the blanket at my side came up to her neck, and I pushed her face closer to mine. It was a fucked up notion to be running through my head as I kissed her roughly, but I thought about how everyone else was doing shit like this at that very moment. Jez and Brandon, Rose, and Emmett, and I was sure even Daddy C was lying somewhere next to Esme. No one does paperwork on Valentine's Day. And I was with my girl. All coupled up and basking in that shit, because even though I never realized it until I met her, it was nice to have somebody too. She moaned into my mouth as my fingers slid in and out of her. Her tongue was ruthless, and the sounds I was making were becoming more and more guttural as I pressed her face to mine harder, and felt her stroking me. I wanted to push her back, and lay on top of her and fucking thank God that I could be inside of her without the safe word. Then she began rocking again, pushing my finger in deeper, and whimpering as her teeth grazed my lip. I added another finger in hopes of saving her need, sliding it in alongside the first one as she pulled my hair again. I was breathless, and my chest was heaving and burning, so I yanked my lips away and plunged my face into the crook of her neck while we worked furiously on each other. As I panted into her neck and felt her gasping into mine, the addition of the second finger reminded me of how tight she was. It was tight and slick and hot, and I couldn't fucking wait to feel it around my dick. I can't fucking wait to be inside of you. I groaned breathlessly into her neck, wishing the teenage hormonal motherfucker would shut the hell up as her hand tightened around my erection. I battled with the urge to sink my teeth into her neck to keep my mouth shut. I couldn't say shit like that to my girl. She panted into my neck as my hand shook and tangled into her curls running down her back.
Do it.
She whimpered, stroking me harder while I brought her shiny curls to my nose. I needed to breathe it in to gain some type of coherency, because those words wouldn't be my saving grace. I kept my fingers moving as fast as she was stroking me, and there was a bright, burning beacon in my vision. It led straight to the dresser across the room, to the second drawer, below the third row of t-shirts, and the uncomfortable ankle socks that I never fucking wore, to that box of condoms nestled underneath that were trying to convince me it was okay, and that I could do it. They were telling